David Morgan of The Morgan Report is back to give us a silver outlook for 2021. David, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure speaking with you today.
David Lynn, it's good to be back. Thank you.
Last time we spoke, you were talking about more of your long-term forecast. Today, I'd like to focus just more on next year, your one-year outlook. Before we get into that, let's recap the year for us. How do you feel about silver prices this year? Did everything go according to your expectations? Well, obviously, not everyone predicted what happened this year, but did silver react according to how it should have?
Yeah, if you go with my long-term thesis, sorry you asked me about a year, but the long-term thesis is we're in the third leg up. That's where we get the longest, or we get the largest increase in price, usually in a short duration of time. And silver confirmed that this year because as of this date, silver's up about 44% from year over year, and it's not picking the choice bottom at 12. It's where it started at January 1st, 2020 to right now. It beat out gold, beat out platinum, beat out palladium. That's confirmation to me, the way I look at this market, wanting silver to lead in the last and final phase, because silver has outperformed the other metals and probably will outperform during this last leg up. So we have confirmation from my work, my studies.
Does silver behave in cycles, long-term super cycles?
It does, and it's so erratic that it's very difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff to get the noise out of the cycle, but yes.
All right, let's touch on your point about silver outperforming the other metals next year. Let's walk through your thesis there.
Okay, well, number one is it's regained its safe haven status this year, and the amount of silver that was purchased by the ETPs, the funds mostly were like 350 million ounces of physical silver. This is absolutely, completely, and totally unheard of. We've never had that kind of investment demand in the silver market in decades. On top of that, you had retail investment that was rather substantial. In most cases, the retail investors were paying extremely high premiums just to get their hands on physical silver. Again, this was seen before in the 2008 financial crisis, but it only lasted a few months. This time it's lasted pretty much most of the year. On top of that, you have a decrease in supply due to the health concerns of about 7% for the year. And jewelry demand was off. Photography, almost anything silverware was off, but investment demand was up. I think that trend will continue. And looking out 1 year, I believe if that trend continues, and again, I believe it will, you will see a very tight silver supply for the industrial users because the investment demand will be so robust.
The industrial demand will be robust, you said?
Well, because the investment demand will be robust, it will squeeze the industrial users, even though they use less this year because of all that's going on in the economy. If there's another, let's say, a replay of what we had, there's another 350 million ounces that are funded by the ETPs. If that were to occur next year in 2021, that would leave very little silver available for the Apple computers, the Teslas, Samsungs, Mitsubishis, everybody that uses silver on an industrial use.
All right, so let's break down investment demand and industrial demand here. But before we get into each of these components, I guess it's important to start with your outlook on the economy because that affects both. So do you think the economy will recover next year? And where do you think risk assets, equities, could be headed in response?
Well, David, I'm bearish. I'd like to be optimistic. I'm a realist. But I don't think we're going to see much of a recovery next year. We could, but I think you're going to see the risk on type of situation. I think a lot of people will be looking for safe havens. The commodity cycle looks like it's finally breaking up. It's at an all-time low on an inflation-adjusted basis. I think we're moving into things that we need, not things that we want. I think the disposable income will be curtailed. People that get their jobs back will probably be saving or paying down debt. So again, it's going to be more, I think, toward what can I save and take care of and hoard cash, save cash, more than a robust economy where people are out buying the latest and greatest, handheld gadget.
So you don't think a vaccine is going to help at all?
Well, that remains to be determined, and certainly it could. Especially, markets are psychology more than anything else, and so if the psychology changes and everyone says, "Oh, back to normal, things are great, then of course you could catch fire, and that would, could spread through the economic system rather rapidly. I don't see that from this point in time, but the market's smarter than I am, so I wouldn't rule it out, but I doubt it.
All right. So offline, you're telling me something very interesting, which is that silver and stocks are correlated more than silver is with gold. I never knew that actually, but that's a very interesting
No,
fact.
I misspoke, or we misunderstood each other.
Oh,
Silver and gold are correlated at 85%.
okay.
So they're almost identical. But what I tried to convey is that silver does really well in a robust economy because you have, more purchases of refrigerators, freezers, automobiles, handheld devices, and all these things in the modern world take silver. So when there's a robust economic activity buying just, normal goods, you see silver actually do well because there's so much demand for it.
Right. So I guess that goes into your economic outlook then. If you don't think the economy is going to be robust, how do you expect silver industrial demand to be robust as well? Unless you're assuming that certain sectors of the economy that need silver are going to do very well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks. So industrial activity on silver this year was down measurably. However, there's certain companies that just are not going to go out of business. So next year, you're going to have a push for solar panels more than ever. So that's regardless of economic conditions, there's going to be a move toward the green economy. That's number one. Number two is the electric vehicle market, the EV market. The best battery for that is a silver zinc battery. And everybody knows that it's just more expensive. You've also got a new phone coming out from the UK that is waterproof, and it's got silver as a biocide on top of the phone. Those will be available. They're military use only right now. They'll be available to the public next year. You also have silver and ruthenium. That's, I can't pronounce it. That's coating that's called AGXX. That's a new biocidal property that will be used throughout the sector. Could be used in masks, could be used on surfaces. It's one of the long-term predictions. I know you asked about next year, but a lot of these are coming to the fore next year, even though I forecast this years ago, that as we get into a more hostile environment, you're going to be silver will be used in surfaces all over the place. That AGXX is used like on in space because of bacteria lives out there inside the environment, and it kills basically all bacteria.
Yeah.
So that little bit of silver used over billions of applications could increase the demand. So I think you're going to see the demand on the industrial side, David, be equal to or greater than it was this year, regardless of economic conditions.
Okay.
There's certain things about silver that there is no replacement for.
Okay. So let's go back to the investment demand now. This year we saw an increase in investment demand, is what you said. Well, that makes sense because people were rushing to safe haven assets. Do you think the same will happen again next year?
I do. I don't know if it's going to be equal to what it was this year. If it is equal to what it was this year, then what I outlined as far as putting a squeeze on the industrial users would probably take place. I mean, there's only so much silver coming out of the ground. Supply was off 7%, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's interesting. Next year, let's say the economy doesn't recover as quickly as some people anticipate. Like you said, it probably would lag a little bit. Would people still rush to safe haven assets, or maybe they would be buying risk assets on the cheap? What do you think?
No, I think you're right. I think you make a good point. I mean, the silver market is so tiny, relative to most other markets. It doesn't take much, buying or selling to move the market rather substantially percentage-wise. So, it's a great question. I don't really have a good answer.
Sure.
I do think I'll stick to my premise that the commodity cycle looks like it's going to take off. Things we need, foodstuffs are going higher. I think really it's the inflation-deflation debate. If I'm correct in my analysis and we're in an overall deflationary environment for the world at large, but at the same time we're moving into a food shortage, most people don't stop and get out their calculator and say, well, geez, there's really deflation. Food's a supply issue. That's why the price is higher. All they're going to see is food prices are higher. That's all they're going to know. They're going to equate that with inflation. Because of that mindset, you're going to see people that will buy extra to put it away because they know the next time they go to the grocery store, it's going to cost more. And that will seep over into an inflationary thinking, which means they'll look for some asset that can help them protect if they have any savings at all. That goes almost directly to the silver market because it's so cheap relative to gold. So I do, long answer, but I wanted to explain it. I do think that's what will happen.
Now, on the supply side, the Silver Institute did report a deficit for 2020, and a lot of that was because of the mine shutdowns that we saw as a result of the pandemic. Next year, mines are expected to perform much better than this year. I've spoken to many miners, and they're planning to ramp up production. And so I think we've talked offline about this briefly, about the possibility of an increase of silver supply weighing down on gold prices, or silver prices, rather. What do you think?
It's possible. It's a very tight market as far as being such a thin market. And we have been in a slight decline in mine production before the health crisis for the last few years. So even if we come back full steam, it will probably still be less than the last few years where we didn't have the health concerns. So I'm not too worried about that really making an impact. It could, but I doubt it. It's at the margin. And again, with all these new products coming out, and I think if you catch fire, let's say for an example, that there's a silver, laced mask that's proven to be, 98.2% effective against the health crisis that we're experiencing. What'll that do? Will that really dig into the silver market? Not really, because there's so little used, but it'll bring the consciousness of silver to the public at large. And then they might start looking into it a little further and then, move from there into probably investing or whatever. So there's a lot about the silver market that has so many vectors, so many tangents that can be taken off of. It's really hard to gauge. I've witnessed it one time in the market in 1980 when I was probably your age or younger. And I watched that once that fire caught, there wasn't anybody out there that wasn't talking about the silver market.
Yeah, the huge spike up in the 80s, in the 1980, the record high for silver price. What was the main cause of that? Was it all fundamentals? Or what happened there?
Well, there's a lot you can research on the web. Really, the hunts were not the primary force. They certainly contributed. You can look that up, were the hunts responsible for the spike? Partially, but no, it was just a psychological change. Inflation was running at 13% in the official numbers. Everyone thought the dollar was going to be destroyed. If I don't get a hold of silver or gold, my money is going to be worth zero tomorrow. That was the thinking. That got the huge run. Everybody was talking about it. It was, spreading by word of mouth. There was no internet. It's like, the dollar is doomed. I need to protect myself. And once that consciousness took over, the run to silver was rather significant, to put it in polite terms.
Well, that seems like the rhetoric today. Inflation is coming because the Fed has instituted monetary stimulus on a record scale never before seen. The dollar is going to collapse as a result. That sounds like the environment we have today, doesn't it, David?
It's very similar, but as Jim Rickards points out, and I've tried to make clear because I haven't said it often enough, if you print, you can print, as an Austrian, and printing more money is inflationary. And that's almost true. It's the velocity of money. It's people out there spending it. Like we talked about earlier in the interview, if we get a more stimulus or whatever, what are people going to do? The job environment improves. Most people are going to say, I need to save the money. I need to pay down debt. So the velocity is going to be very low, which doesn't contribute much to inflation. But once the velocity picks up, where I gave the example of food prices, people aren't going to consider what the reason is. They're going to say, that's inflationary. I need to spend it. So I can make an argument on both sides. I lean toward the latter. I think that we're going to get that consciousness again. Whether it's going to be similar to the 1980 US phenomena or not remains to be determined. But think about this. Let's say that is pervasive throughout the world rather than just the United States. Then where do you think the price of silver will be, especially with the internet and the instant communications we have? I mean, once Facebook groups start talking about silver as the best place to protect your wealth, and that goes into, all the other ones, Pinterest and Instagram and all the ones, that I don't know all of them. I mean, it could catch fire so much more easily this time than last time. And all of a sudden you got to run to silver like you've never seen in the world history. So is that going to happen? I don't know. I'm just making the argument that the availability for that to happen is right in front of our eyes.
Yeah. Speaking of inflation, I want to get your thoughts on where inflation is headed next year. Now, I know for a fact, you talked about food. I know where I live in Canada, food has gone up. But the Federal Reserve and actually most central banks around the world don't look at food and energy. They look at core inflation, which is ex food and energy. And so monetary policy isn't going to change just because food and energy have changed prices. So how do you see?
Yeah, that's the best point you've made. Sorry if I interrupted you.
No, that's
That's
fine.
excellent, because taking food and energy out of the CPI is the most idiotic thing in the world, as far as I'm concerned. I want to go on record saying that. I mean, the two things people need the most, they need to eat and they need to transport, they need energy. To take those out is absurd. So that's where I might have a bit of a difference with Jim Rickards. I mean, he goes with the official number, which I won't argue a number, but how it's derived. So, I know that fuel prices are down. I, buy diesel and gasoline, so I see the price. But regardless, food prices in the last Maunder minimum, when we had, and whether we believe the sun cycle or not, just going back to previous history where we're like 350, 400 years ago, where there was a huge food shortage, food prices went up sevenfold. Now, I'm not saying it's going up sevenfold this time, but just think, with as skinny as the budget is for most households in the United States right now under the current conditions, if food prices just doubled over a year, what would that do? So I am concerned about it. I want to be a gloomer doomer. I want to be a realist, but you asked, that's the answer.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, David. Okay, so let's put all this together then. What's your forecast for prices for the year?
I looked at it yesterday, and I think we could touch $40 an ounce next year.
David, thank you so much for your thoughts today. Excellent thoughts as always. Thank you for your forecasts. Have a happy holiday and happy new year to you.
Well, same to you and everyone at Kitco.
And where can people find out more about your work?
The easiest is to go to themorganreport.com, get on our free email list, go to the blog, pull down the blog, and at the top, there's a navigator for our LinkedIn, our YouTube, and our Twitter feed. Twitter is @SilverGuru22, and everything on that blog is for free. And again, I appreciate the interview.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate your time. I look forward to catching up with you in the new year. Thank you for watching. I'm David Lynn.